Deep breath, right? What a night that this has been. It's truly an inspiration for somebody like me to be a part of this event with all these speakers and volunteers and exec team, like I said. But I think tonight is inspirational on many different levels because here we are, 100 of us all in person, sure, with masks, but still together. A year ago, this would not have been possible as the COVID-19 pandemic was starting to tighten its grip on our societies. Much of us were sheltering at home, uncertainty circled our communities, and fear blanketed our world. However, it gets even crazier to think that 2 years ago, this was our current reality compared to what it is right now. The NBA playoffs were in full swing, and the 45,000 fans that packed the arena were all in attendance, all packed in on top of each other, no masks, no social distancing. On top of that, the U.S. Congress met, the representatives and the senators alike, all making policy. You and I didn't know what contact tracing was, or we didn't even know masks. And well, bats are just cute little innocent creatures, and to think the harm that they've caused us, how has our world changed so quickly? I share this not to dwell on the past or even to make light of the situation, but more to point out the exponential change that our society has faced in just 2 short years. In many ways, as a community, we are becoming numb to change. This has prompted administrations, much like the one here at Hope College, to enact policy that I've named, "Let's just get through it" policy. Or simply, these are policies that allow individuals and administrations alike to just get through the current problem. This has caused quotes I've heard that I've said, and especially from my peers, I've heard, "Oh, it's almost 2 weeks till the end of the semester, or to the halfway point in the semester. It's almost summer," basically. Or, "COVID lockdown restrictions get reevaluated in 2 months. That'll change. Things will change. Things will get better." Or maybe some of you, and I hope not, are saying, "If this guy just talks a little bit faster, we can all get out of here and go home." I hope that I don't hear that, but it's possible. Other than this last one, again, these are all things I hear, if not on a daily, at least a weekly basis. And sure, that's okay on an individual level because we need to do what we must to get through these hardships. But I think there's potential for detriment when it becomes ingrained in our community-wide concepts. Because as I said before, we are becoming numb to change. This has been going on for much longer than the current COVID-19 pandemic, however. This has been going on for decades. When you begin to analyze, which we will do shortly, the exponential change because of technology, you realize that we are at a point that we have never been at before in our societies. A dangerous point. Shown here is an exponential graph, much like the one you might have seen in a high school algebra class. Nothing too fancy. It has an x-axis, which is time, so as we go left to right, that just means time is passing throughout history. And the y-axis is the rate of technological expansion, which is just a fancy phrase for how fast we are making and inventing things. So nothing too complicated. It has 3 points on it, and I'd like to go over those 3 points. The first point is the hunter and gatherer lifestyle. This is a time period that has spanned centuries throughout our history. And as you can see, the slope of the graph is very, very small, which means as time is passing, the rate that we are inventing things is really not there. It's very, very small. This is the point in our history when we were cavemen. We were emperors in Asia and in Europe. We were colonizing America. It came all the way up to roughly the 1700s. To use an analogy that I really like, a grandfather and the grandson of that grandfather in one of these time periods experienced the very same technologies that of each other. Their diets were the same. Their medical devices were the same. Their technologies as a whole were the same. This begins to change, however, when we look at point 2, which can be labeled the Industrial Revolution or the 1800s and 1900s in our history. At this point, you can see the slope is starting to increase, so it's almost at a 1-to-1 ratio between time and the rate that we are inventing things, which simply means that as time is passing, now we can see that we are changing as we move through generations. Again, like I said, this can be looked at in the 18 and 1900s in the Industrial Revolution, and more specifically, how technology and warfare increased during the 1900s. On the left there, you see an airplane that is called the Royal Aircraft Factory SE-5, which is the British fighter plane during World War I. Now, we can simply see there's a wooden propeller, there's 2 sets of wings, and there's an open cockpit for the pilot to sit in. Now, contrast this with the right there, the F-4 Phantom, which is the American fighter plane during the Vietnam War. As you can see, there's a closed cockpit, simply one wing system, and instead of a propeller, it has a jet fuel system. Now, as we can see, it doesn't take a smart person to realize that these two planes are drastically different. However, they were made and used only 50 years apart. World War I occurred during the 1910s, and the Vietnam War occurred roughly during the 1960s. To use the same grandfather and grandson analogy, those two individuals did experience drastically different technologies in their day. Their diets were different, their medical procedures were different, and as you can see, the technology was different. However, it doesn't stop there. We can point at point 3, which is simply modern day. And as you can see, the rate of the advancement is almost vertical, which means that time is passing very, very slowly, yet the rate that we are inventing things is at an all-time high. And like anything in modern day, we have to point to COVID, right, to talk about what we're experiencing. In the COVID-19 pandemic, we've experienced 3 vaccines that have been made and approved in less than a year. This is unfathomable if you asked any scientists a year ago. Not only that, but the rate that we've produced masks and testing kits has rivaled the rate that we produced ammunition during World War II. Again, unbelievable. But not only that, as you can see, food is being delivered by small little cars. So who would have thought that was possible only a year ago? Screw the grandfather and grandson analogy. We are at a point where it seems like every year our children are growing up in different societies than they were just a couple years before. So now you're asking yourself, as I did, why does this matter, Chris? What is your point? Technology is good, right? Technology is bringing community together, right? Well, yes, we're able to collaborate and communicate in ways that we never have before, so that's good. And we're able to experience different cultures in ways that we never have before. That's also good. That's bringing our human race together. That's true. We're also able to help individuals with disabilities through our technology, and that's also good. Maybe least importantly, maybe most importantly, people are able to just swipe left on their iPhones and get a date and not even talk to anybody. That's truly amazing what our technology has come to. However, there is harm in technology, and these harmful trends have 2 distinct patterns to them. The first pattern is the inability to recognize a trend because we simply don't have the data that supports that trend. Simply, demographics are adopting technology so quickly nowadays that we're unable to really understand how they will affect them in 5 or 10 years. For example, individuals 7 to 10 years old, 7 to really 12 years old are experiencing and getting their hands on individualized internet devices. That's never happened before, right? Now, will this be beneficial to their behavioral development? Maybe. Will it be detrimental? Also maybe. We simply don't know how this will affect them long term. However, the second pattern is kind of the opposite. It is the ability to recognize that we have the data to prove a harmful trend, yet the inability to uningrain that trend from our society. And to point to this, I'd like to point to the 1960s where McDonald's and Burger King were business giants. The public was hooked on their fast food and their menus. And it became painfully clear that the public was hooked on these menus when we started to realize that the saturated fats and the highly processed foods were causing all sorts of health problems. High obesity rates, high cholesterol, heart problems were everywhere. And despite the scientists and politicians' best efforts, even up to the 2021 that we live in today, we are still unable to unadopt that pattern from our society. We're unable to change that because we're still experiencing, unfortunately, high obesity rates, high levels of heart problems, and high cholesterol. Now, a timeline can then be produced with these 2 patterns that shows where this is really powerful. Because as you can see there, in between the point where we have the lack of data and the point where we have the data but we are unable to disprove it or uningrain it, there is an inflection point where the possibility for universal change is the greatest. And once we have this played out linearly, we can use technological trends to then compare it to this timeline and see what point we're at. Whether we're at the point in the trend where we do not have the data, or whether we're at the point where we do but we can't change anything, or whether we're at the point where we do have both and we're able to change something. Community in its purest form, has been declining due to the introduction of technology that encourages isolationism and individualism. iPhones, iPads, video games, virtual business platforms, and now a pandemic have all caused individuals, humans, to stop seeing each other as they did 20 years ago, and 50 years ago, and 200 years ago, 2,000 years ago. We are at a point that we have never been at in our societies. Now, how does this tie into the timeline that we just discussed? Well, simply, we're at this inflection point. We're at that green point, and I can prove it. You see, in order to be at the lack of data, you need the absence of statistics that prove that a trend is harmful to the society. Unfortunately, in 2021, we do have the statistics that prove that the lack of community is hurting the individuals within it. You see, in 2019 compared to 2020, in 2020, the number of clinical anxiety screenings rose by 93%, almost doubled, also due to COVID-19. Now, at the same time, the number of clinical depression screenings rose 62%. These are staggering numbers. Now, in the same time, in March and April, the number of domestic violence phone calls to hotlines decreased by 50%. And when I saw this statistic, I smiled, right? Because that's good that people are calling less. But analysts and experts actually say that it's not because of a lack of need, but a lack of ability that these numbers are not being called. The numbers transcend COVID-19, however. In 2003, it was studied that demographics, individuals from 10 to 24 years old experienced anxiety and depression at a rate of 5.4%. I thought this was high until I realized that the same study was done in 2012, only 9 years later, and it was discovered that 8.6% were then diagnosing themselves or being diagnosed with anxiety or depression. In only 9 years, that statistic rose 3%. As a 22-year-old who will have children eventually entering this demographic in 15 years, this is especially terrifying, because what will it be when they are entering? Will it be 30%? Will it be 40%? These numbers are terrifying. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we know that we're not in the other point. We're not yet in the inability to reverse the trend, because humans have shown that we desire to gather with loved ones, to support small businesses and small restaurants, to go to sporting events like you just saw about 10 minutes ago. We are not yet at the point where we prefer virtual community over in-person community. Which means that we are right at the point in modern day where we have the potential for change. So now I ask myself again, maybe you guys are too, what do we do with this? Well, do we ignore any safeguards that are still lingering because of the COVID-19 pandemic? No. Do we panic? Also no. What you need to understand, however, is that big technological devices and big companies are not going to save community from themselves. It's up to us, me and you, at the grassroots level, to fight for what has benefited humanity for so long. Fight for what has often saved us from ourselves, right? Fight for the very nature of our existence. We were made to laugh with each other, love each other, and live together. So, while COVID-19 still exists, be careful, but do not lay down in the face of adversity, please. And as COVID-19 lifts its grip on the world, lean back into what we have known to be true for so long. Community is valuable. Community saves lives. And in its most purest form, its most beautiful form, community, no matter your religious beliefs, your economic status, your education, or your anything else, community is our purpose to grow stronger, smarter, more loving together. Thank you very much.